I brought this up on other shows before, but I have a friend named Max Shapiro who lives in LA, and I constantly give him his flowers with this line because it is something that I have had these thoughts, but he said it in such a direct way that I think it just really resonates with me, which is, I think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, let's call it, that was the stamp on the door that was like, that restaurant is probably going to go out of business. I have very similar experiences at Chef William Bradley's Addison or John Yao at Cato. I could go on. There's a bunch of different restaurants where I've had these moments. And I swear at myself as I'm eating that bite because I'm like, I hope I can swear on this show. I just basically say like, you're going to have harder days than today in your future. I don't know what they're going to look like. I don't know what the circumstances are going to be. I don't know whose fault it's going to be.
Every dish tells a story, and with Rough Chop, that story begins with passion, precision, and purpose. We bring the soul of your vision into the world of fine dining, creating an unforgettable experience for those who are wanting more than just a meal. Whether it's a private dinner or an elegant catered event, this is where every plate becomes a moment. Elevate your next gathering with us and book now at roughchopllc.com.
Chef Justin Khanna, I sincerely appreciate you taking on part 2. The first conversation that we've had, we barely scratched the surface. You had a lot to say, and I wanted to continue to listen, but unfortunately, due to time constraints, we both have lives outside of podcasting. We kind of had to end it soon, but the first podcast that we did amazing. And I'm hoping that part 2 will be a lot more insightful and a lot more entertaining as well. So if any viewers who hasn't seen part 1 yet, make sure you guys do that first before you go into this one. And then also link it in the description below. But Chef, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really, really well. Thanks so much again for having me back on. The first show was a joy to be a part of. And, I'm no stranger to doing part 2 episodes, but to have one happen so soon is really cool because we can kind of like have episode 1 in the near rear view mirror for our memory. And yeah, just kind of curious to hear DMs that you might have gotten, some follow-up questions, and just to expand on the topics we covered last time.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, your experience already speaks for itself, and I think a lot of people know who you are already as it is. And so I want to continue learning from you as a chef, not just as a podcaster as well. But I think that this conversation is definitely going to be very productive and insightful. So I did want to start off with one simple question real quick, just to kind of break the ice. But if Michelin called you tomorrow and offered you a head chef position with full creative control, would you take it? Why or why not?
So interesting. Probably not. And the reason behind that is multifactorial. So I think the first one comes from being at this place of having been in a almost pseudo position of that at the last restaurant that I worked at, number 1, which was in a lot of ways kind of like the lead sous chef position. I was developing dishes for the tasting menu, in a lot of ways following my chefs and the concept's vision in bringing those dishes to life. They were in no way, shape, or form Justin Khanna, quote unquote, dishes. It was the constraints of being on the west coast of Norway, using really high quality seafood, using seasonal produce in a tasting menu structure, in the way that my chef liked to really treat like nose to tail cooking and a lot of classic French technique. And so there was a lot of those like boxes ticked that I sometimes find, at least the folks that I work with on the chef side, they sometimes reach for one of those if they feel like one of those things happens to be missing. And so, I've done the seasonal produce thing, but I've never really gotten into butchery. And so that's the reason why I want the opportunity to have, free reign on a menu, because it will allow me the ability to finally do XYZ. I will finally be able to do a 7-course tasting menu because I'm only used to doing a la carte. And I just wish someone would give me the opportunity to do blank, one of these things. And then I came off of that experience and I started doing pop-ups where then it was Justin Khanna, the menu. Do you know what I mean? I was writing my own tasting menu things. And then I found a business partner and had an event production company where I ran the culinary program of that. And clients would come to us and say, yes, we want your stuff, but then we also want XYZ thing because we're doing a product launch and it's of this particular style and this is going to be the decor and we need a custom menu that's just going to fit this and the furniture is going to look like this. And so we need to have XYZ things in place. And so all of those kind of like creative itches, more or less, got scratched, more so to speak. And if I'm being honest, I really want to step into, when I get back into, whether it's restaurants or private events, or I know that we've shared in the past episode that I'm kind of in a season of family right now. I'm much more interested in, again, going almost kind of like pushing myself, if I'm being honest, like professionally, to try to go even further to like the experience level of thinking about the execution of the thing. Maybe not so much on the menu side. And so what that basically means for myself is trying to find a great chef and trying to actually put that person in the position of, like attracting great talent, pointing them like a laser in the direction of this thing that we're trying to execute on, whether that's, again, a space that has been offered. And wouldn't it be great if we could have like an oyster bar in this particular situation, or we want to partner up with this large brand and do this XYZ thing. That I think is like the next thing that I get excited about. And it's almost like I heard this great analogy the other day, which was you would never badmouth your algebra teacher because you need algebra to learn geometry, and then you need geometry to learn calculus. And so it's like, as you start to learn these different levels of things, it doesn't make any one level this thing that you want to like poo-poo, or this thing that you want to just talk smack on, or this thing you want to point back to and say, I didn't need that. Look how far, look at me doing calculus now. You know what I mean? Like I want to talk shade on my algebra teacher. It is like every single step of that was necessary. And so I look at that going forward and I say, okay, if that is going to be the case, all of the experience that I had writing menus and being the one who's going to put my quote unquote stamp on the dish, and you try something and it fails and the guest sends it back and says like, this wasn't what you guys had on the menu last time, or whatever. That turns into experience that I can use to, like, when I'm sitting across the table from a chef who is in that position where they do want something like that out of a role. And again, it turns it much more into that's the cook to chef to entrepreneur track that I've covered in kind of episode 1 that listeners can go back and dive into. But it's like, as I start to craft those skills, and again, I'm by no means an expert in the entrepreneur space, but it is something that gets me more excited than, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. That offer that you just laid out on the table would have been like, that version of Justin in that timeline was like, oh my God, sign me up. Like, could not be happier to get the opportunity like that.
So during that time, influencing started to kind of get its rise, right? And you're starting to see a lot more influencers going to these restaurants, whether they've seen it through a different video and they're like, okay, I want to try this out. And then they also wanted to pull out a video of their own experience, or even if a restaurant has invited them and then saying, hey, I'll pay you set amount of money for you to be able to create a reel and say how great my restaurant is, even though it may or may not be good. Do you think fine dining is just luxury cosplay right now? Like, who is it really for? Is it for the cooks, for the chefs, for the influencers? Like, I want to know what you think about that.
Real quick, if you're enjoying this conversation and you want more behind the scenes stories of the hospitality industry, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's free. It'll help us grow. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming up next. Now back to the conversation.
I brought this up on other shows before, but I have a friend named Max Shapiro who lives in LA, and I constantly give him his flowers with this line because it is something that I have had these thoughts, but he said it in such a direct way that I think it just really resonates with me, which is the difference between chef-driven dining and guest-driven dining. And so that's kind of the first thing that I look for in any of these situations. And I call it experience is everything, or the action of improving the experience. And that's ultimately, to me, what it should be for. It is an experience for the guest, ultimately. And I think if you really start to peel back the layers or ask enough why questions to any one of these players that you talked about, the influencer, the chef, the cook, any of the critic, it really comes down to you can get short-term outcomes from prioritizing any one of those other people. We see that happen with restaurant has a really splashy opening. They have all the influencers come and they do 2 nights of just influencers coming. I've been to these dinners, right? Where it's like, and it's not even me that's the person who's producing the content. It's I have friends who get invited to these things or they get offered to get paid to come to one of these things and speak favorably on a place. It's not always the case, but then they text me and say, hey, I need a +1 for this thing. Will you come? It's a very strange environment to be in a restaurant. I've also been a part of opening teams where that first couple days, friends and family opening, it is also this kind of like artificial environment where you're cooking the food and the chef is standing behind the pass, but then they're also going out to talk to their kindergarten teacher who happens to be in the dining room. And so it starts to almost like create these mirages or these like hallucinations that happen as you're cooking because you're working the fish station and you don't happen to know this person's kindergarten teacher. You just know that this is like the second time you've made this dish in your life and it's got to be perfect because so-and-so is on table 13. And so as I start to, again, think about that frame of who is it for, that's a great question that Seth Godin asks, the famous marketer and author. I think that can sometimes illuminate some of the decision-making actions that a person takes as they're in their organization. And that's, I think, where the rubber meets the road. Because you're ultimately going to decide, do I reach out to these influencers and do this dinner or not? Do I change the sauce on this dish or not? Do I all of a sudden add another tableside presentation to this thing maybe possibly overwhelm my team on the front of house side or the back of house side or not? And then similar to the time perspective that I kind of took, does it actually lead to the outcomes that you want in your organization? Because any of us in this age of TikTok and algorithmically fed pieces of content, views are easy, relatively speaking. You can get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of views on a video if you manage to structure it in the right way. Does that translate to the things that you actually care about? Maybe, maybe not. And so I think that's maybe the more important question for maybe the chefs listening to tune into is, if you're going to get some hype, are you well positioned to take advantage of that? Is it worth chasing if all of a sudden it's this like lever that you keep pulling and it's like, yeah, for the first couple pulls, you're going to get a bunch of money coming out, a bunch of tokens coming out of that machine. But then ultimately when that dries up, it's like, do you have anything, to backstop you? Or is it going to turn into this thing where all of a sudden you're looking around and you're saying, I have all this infrastructure and I don't have enough demand to satisfy it. And then because it was so kind of like easy come, it becomes easy go. And then all of a sudden you find yourself and you're like, well, I haven't really built a brand. I don't have relationships with anybody. I haven't thought about profitability here. And now you end up kind of like with your pants around your ankles and you're like, okay, now what do I do? And so that can be really, really frustrating. And I really think about it in contrast to some of this more patient, potentially slow moving. It's not to say that you can't move quickly in this way of being, but I think it is this much more robust, relationship driven. Again, like maybe you do have some regulars that start to become a staple in the tables or sitting at the bar, or they start to choose you for celebrations every single year. Can that turn into something that over time starts to compound on itself and then actually turn into something that, again, it has sturdiness and robustness, and you're not having to worry about, again, these kind of like trials and tribulations that come with any of these businesses that, again, on paper, when you do the comparison game and you look at somebody else's Instagram account and you're like, man, they got so many views, all these external metrics that exist. And it's like, you often don't see those restaurants posting their P&L. You often don't see those restaurants posting those big team photos or those big celebrations of like, hey, so-and-so has been with us for 5 years. We're celebrating their 5-year anniversary of working here at this organization. You don't really often see those happening. And so, again, if I can say anything to the kind of the question you're asking, it's like, be careful how you're comparing yourself. Really focus on how are you running your business. And then don't get caught up. Any single time, it's okay to say no, maybe is kind of like one of the summarizing points that I'd like to share as a snippet of advice for someone is it's okay to actually put that on the shelf and say, yeah, that's maybe for somebody else, or the way that I'm running this business, the way that I want to do things, it's not gonna how we're gonna run things. That's not our MO. At least not for right now.
You know, I've seen restaurants where you're right, like they pack them full of influencers, and you said it. You couldn't have said it any better. Easy come, easy go, right? And you touched on a really good point as well, where if you're gonna bring in that influx of influencers, you're gonna expect that many guests as well, just to but you also have to live up to the standard, to the hype, because then it's all gone, right? And so, with that being said, is the next generation of chefs being set up to fail with content creator mindset? Is being a chef online killing the art of being a chef in real life?
I want to answer your actual question, but I do want to quickly touch on a word that you said there, which is hype. And I think it's very important to distinguish the difference between genuine, this place either came out of the blue or popped up out of nowhere or changed their concept or their ownership or the way that they decided to do their menu. And oh my goodness, this is like came out of nowhere. And what you're seeing here is a rise in demand. That's actual hype. Versus what we kind of touched on in the last little section here, which is a little bit of this manufactured. There's money exchanging hands, which again, I'm not opposed to. I don't care if money exchanges hands. I just think you need to be sometimes aware of the fact that the reason this place is getting posted about from a dozen different accounts in your local area is because some of this stuff is happening, and it's not often hype, number one. Number two, when money exchanges hands, it can, and I've been on the other side of this too, a very clear rules when I talk about brands coming to me and saying, hey, I want to send you this pair of chef shoes. I want to send you this knife. I want to send you this knife bag. And I want to pay you for a review. The way that is always dictated on my channel, at least, I'll only speak for myself, is it's advertising space. You would pay for this, whether you went on Facebook or if you went on Google, or you would pay for eyeballs regardless. You're paying for production because it's work that I have to put in to make this stuff. But the opinion ultimately has to be my own. I have to be able to reserve the right to be honest about XYZ thing so that even if I call out some blemishes that exist, on my case, it's usually on the product side, I'm helping to make sure people are aware of just my experience in handling and using and being hands-on with this thing. It does create this level of, well, this person sent me XYZ number of dollars to come to this meal. And it does kind of like, it doesn't taint the experience. It just puts this like colored glasses over your experience as you're having the thing. And yeah, maybe the wine was, maybe not served at the right temperature, or, maybe the sauce was a little bit cold when they poured it tableside on the fish. And does it turn into this situation where that influencer is now going to say, I'm not going to call that out because what if they have another, I know this is a restaurant group and they have another restaurant opening that's happening down the track, and I want to make sure I get paid to also attend that thing in the future too. Again, not saying this is every influencer in the world, just trying to put people in the place of understanding how these dynamics are at play. And so you have that, again, just as a thought exercise. You have one of those situations where a dozen influencers get invited to this opening. Show me the percentage of favorable versus unfavorable coverage of that restaurant opening. And some influencers, again, I'm really potentially burning some bridges here. They speak from this sense of, oh, well, XYZ thing is, like maybe a little bit off, but this is their soft opening, and so I'm willing to give a little bit of a pass here, blah, 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 blah. That's number one. The favorable and unfavorable coverage, that's an easy metric to kind of look at. The other one is, how many times do you see any of those influencers actually naturally going back to one of those places because they genuinely enjoyed it enough to say, I don't really care that I'm not getting paid to this thing, but it was like so good that I told XYZ people about it from a genuine word of mouth perspective, and I just really wanted to go back here. My wife and I joke that we find ourselves doing that all too frequently now that we have like a little one running around at home. It's like, We are exclusively homebodies when it comes to the restaurants that we frequent. It's only the places that we know are going to be a good experience, because if we spent the time and energy and money to get a babysitter, we want to know that we're going to have an amazing experience, and we're way less likely now to try a new spot. And so we're going to go to our favorite places where I happen to know the chef de cuisine, and you know what I mean? We know the wine director here. We know exactly what things on the menu we're really looking forward to ordering. And so can you notice that behavior in some of the influencers that go to these places? And sometimes that is more telling than what they decide to put in their script and write and ultimately put on Instagram. And then I think thirdly, there's this, I had a conversation with a friend about a week ago. He's a chef at a well-known restaurant here in Seattle, and we had coffee. And I was like, man, we were talking about the same topic, and I said, I think influencers can sometimes be too easily impressed. And let's start to think sometimes about the ripple effects of being easily impressed. And so if you haven't eaten at enough places to know that tableside saucing at a 3 Michelin star restaurant might happen 6 times throughout your meal, and you happen to go to a place where, again, this is not bashing, this is not trying to be elitist or anything like that. It is just saying you go to a restaurant and it's your first time seeing a chef come out in their whites with a copper pan, and they're saucing the fish that you just had tableside. That, for the uninitiated, for the person who's never experienced that before, is like, oh my God. That turns into the thing that is like, I've never had that happen before. And I can go on and list a multitude of different steps of service that some of the best organizations in the world do on a consistent daily basis that, again, it's just part of their day. It's just part of the way that they naturally know how to treat guests when they come into the dining room. But that easily impressed part starts to ripple out through the way that they produce the content. And again, I don't have a problem when it is genuinely talking about, I have never experienced this before. I start to get frustrated when it starts to turn into superlatives. This is the best. This is an incredible, this was a perfect experience, XYZ. And now we're getting into real semantics, because for that person at that specific point in time, yeah, maybe it was a perfect experience. I just think it starts to turn into a situation where it starts to create the other side of hype. That's the other side of the coin that I was trying to kind of reference here, where the genuine hype is something that, again, like, I like that kind of stuff. Like, that gets me excited. I don't mind standing in line. I will go and drive 2 hours to go to a place that is like, man, this place is like the real deal. They're doing it right. I can really look forward to something like that. And that's another thing, just talking psychologically speaking, that like you can get just as much enjoyment out of expecting to go to a place as you do when you actually sit down in the chair and actually have the burrito or whatever it happens to be. But then the other side of hype is all of these other qualities. You can kind of like peel back the curtain and you can start to see these like gnarly little things that exist underneath this more negative or maybe not so desirable type of hype. Money exchanging hands, people who don't necessarily have that much experience or credibility, or again, they're too easily impressed talking about the experience. It isn't something that they would naturally gravitate back to. Those points all cause me a little bit of frustration as we're talking about some of these things. And the problem is, and again, this gets back to the cook, chef, entrepreneur side of it a little bit, at least in the way that I'm going to try to tie all this together, is sometimes the chef doesn't always have the confidence or the gusto or the bravado to kind of speak up in some of these conversations when and again, this is typically how it happens. I'm giving one specific example. It might happen in a multitude of different ways at the restaurants that you work at, listener. The general manager hires a PR firm, and the PR firm is the one that organizes the influencer dinner. And then the PR firm tells the general manager to tell the chef, hey, we have 20 people coming in, and this is exactly what we need you to do for them. Those degrees of separation make it now so that the chef doesn't always have a good enough grip on the situation to actually make it so that the experience is XYZ. Because the PR company who is not involved in restaurants in any way, shape, or form. They're going to be on contract for this one project, and then they're going to kind of like sail off into the sunset. I don't necessarily know if that sets the chef up for success in making sure that, again, their vision can fully be executed. Because, again, the PR company only cares about do the dry ice table side, thing, do the bubble on the cocktail thing, turn on the disco lights when we bring out this dessert. And that all turns into something that it is more show than it is experience. And that's kind of like a parallel I drew in the first episode that we talked about. So, yeah, I hope that at least got to some semblance of what you wanted to jam on.
Yeah, no, you touched on a lot right now. You see, so I recently just did a video on Pizzeria Irene. Shout out to them out in Orange, Old Town Orange. And they didn't offer me any money. They didn't offer me anything. And whenever I go out, I'll take a video of it real quick. My friend was pretty surprised on how fast I was able to record and then have dinner and not, worry about the editing until later. That's not, whatever. But I was telling him like, no, like if I'm here to eat, I'm here to eat, learn, and see what I could have done better or what could I learn from this experience, And I'm hesitant a lot of the times to showcase these restaurants because as a chef, as a professional chef, my palate is my reputation. And one thing that you touched on was like passing money. Like me personally, man, like I don't know if I would be able to receive money, not enjoy the experience, and then lie about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep.
I understand that my perspective on service might be a little different from yours, and maybe my experience was completely different from yours. Maybe they had a bad day, or maybe we just have different standards. But the fact that I couldn't accept money because they're trying to get me to review the restaurant. It's a very hard line for me because again, I'm trying to protect my reputation as a chef. And one thing I've always said is that I'm a chef first, and then sure, you can call me an influencer. I don't even see myself as that, but like people say, oh, like you're big shot or whatever, right? But I'm nowhere near that level. I'm nowhere near you, so I can't even call myself where I'm at, where you're at, and stuff like that. So that to me, that was like one of the main things that came out in my mind was just like, I don't know if I could do that. But with that being said, like Spider-Man, right? The movie, with great power comes with great responsibility. And with my reputation, my training, my palate, and just knowing what I'm looking for, Pizzeria Irene, that restaurant did check all those boxes for me. They had a great wine list. They had a great pizza stone, all that, like everything was perfect, small, intimate. It was nice. But with that being said, who holds the real power in today's culinary world? Traditional media? Is it influencers? Is it the diner? Who does?
I still think that power, when we talk about the kind of like make or breakness, quote unquote, of a restaurant, I think gone are the days of one individual, let's call it like a review, totally tanking a restaurant. I think in the later days of kind of like right before the pandemic, if I'm really being honest, I think the pandemic changed a lot from people really having a couple things happen with restaurants. So one, getting restaurants taken away from them was like a really big, like, oof. Yeah. Man, I love restaurants. I frequent them. I can't go to my neighborhood spot. My wife and I have date night every week and we can't go anymore. And then it kind of morphed into kind of like, well, I can get my stuff, but it's going to come in delivery boxes and it's going to be a little bit slightly different. And the certain things on the menu maybe changed. And then inflation. So now all of a sudden prices are higher and, maybe the location by my house isn't available anymore. So now I have to spend a little more time to get to the place, the different location of this place. Staff changes. So this person that I normally know at this restaurant has now moved, or they're at a different restaurant, or they quit the industry entirely. And so around like right before the pandemic, you started to see a couple things happen with like Pete Wells at New York Times writing a couple of like really scathing pieces on certain 3 Michelin star restaurants or 2 Michelin star restaurants. Other places like even Michelin taking restaurants that were 3 stars and knocking them down to 2, maybe down to 1. And then you started to, again, see what we're kind of discussing here, which is the rise of influencers, of certain people, experienced or not, easily impressed or not, going to some of these places, and maybe they publish a piece of content that says something to the effect of, I just don't get the hype, or it really wasn't that good, or maybe it was a little bit overpriced, or look at the little, like tiny bits of food that we got and I left hungry from this experience. And so both of those together makes me kind of get the sense of, and again, I'm really trying to be realistic and pragmatic here and talking about what I'm seeing in the industry, which is that review on Eater, or again, let's maybe take the Pete Wells example. I'm almost positive Pete Wells had a really scathing thing against Per Se in New York. He talked about the cleanliness of the place. He talked about the menu, talked about like some dish being like old bong water or something like that. If you remember that article that got written ages ago, I might be misattributing a couple things here, but it kind of like those of us that keep up in food media will kind of remember this time. I think 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, let's call it, that was the stamp on the door that was like, that restaurant is probably going to go out of business. Like that is like, because authority is centralized and it's top down and it is authoritative in the way of, we're going to tell you what is good and what is not, and there's not other competing voices in the market, that's going to turn into, again, this thing that is going to be a really scathing situation. Now, I think because you have so many voices, we have what we're talking about, which is this overwhelming number of like it's permissionless. There's no barriers to publishing a piece of content. You can go just with your phone and sit at a table and have an experience and publish it on the internet and say, hey, I'm a food critic now, or I'm a food writer now, or I'm a food content creator now. And in a lot of ways, that's true, right? Like in a lot of ways, I love the fact that anybody basically has the ability now to build this expertise and provide value to some of these organizations. And so it's created this really interesting situation where we're saying the bad that we're talking about, but then at the same time, there's this good of restaurants maybe don't have to worry about one review coming and the local newspaper came out and maybe they didn't really have a good experience. We had an off night. Something happened in the dining room that was just like out of our control. And now all of a sudden we have to worry about that totally bankrupting our business. So maybe on that front, I don't think influencers have all the power. I don't think traditional media has all the power. Then we can flip it the other way where it's like, do chefs have all the power? Like, do I as the chef have the ability to kind of like, if I want 3 stars, I can just speak it into existence and I can get it. I don't think that's true either, right? Like you still have to put the work in. You still have to write the menus. You still have to hire the staff. You still have to design the dining room. You still have to print the menus. You still have to work with the seasons. You still have to do all of these things. And even if you do everything right, there's a couple restaurants that kind of come to mind as I'm thinking through this that are like, I've had two stars for ages, and all I want is 3. I mean, that was the story at Noma for however long before, Noma ever had the opportunity to get 3 Michelin stars. It was like, man, 2 stars again for Noma. 2 stars again? They just got World's 50 Best and there's still 2 Michelin stars? That was a chapter for so long. And so I don't necessarily know if the chefs maybe have the power either. Because we'll also see certain moments where the chef doesn't happen to be there for a little while. And their team is running the show. So it's like maybe there's another player in this, choose your character adventure here where, maybe the underlying infrastructure, the operational team maybe has the power. I think there's more of an argument for that than the chef has the power. But I really come back to, and again, the reason I focus so much on experience in the writings that I do, and again, the work that I do with individuals on the coaching side is like, I think the guests have the power still. I really think it is the situation where it has just that right combination of it's decentralized from the sense of like there's so, you might have 2 influencers coming into dinner tonight, but you have 120 other guests coming in. And so just numerically, there's a asymmetry here, where there's way more guests, where if you can provide an experience that's going to get each of them to tell one person, that compounds really, really freaking fast. And now all of a sudden you have this like genuine hype that's surrounding the work that you do. And then again, I think some of this starts to flip-flop the other way. And it's one of the reasons why we talk about you get this big boom of the chefs did everything right, the critics did everything right, and the influencers did everything right to get this restaurant open. And once the guests arrived, shoom, it sucks the air out of the room. And now all of a sudden there's this void and this vacuum. And now, 3 months down the track, we don't have anybody making any reservations. That's why. Because you had the person with the power, who's at least in my opinion, the guest, ultimately unfulfilled, unimpressed. Again, expectations not met, any of these sorts of things that I think people crave and they look for. Again, especially coming out of something like the pandemic, where it's like, I get there's behavior that is like abhorrent that happens at restaurants these days. People don't, know how to behave anymore. Etiquette has gone completely out the window. People don't have any loyalty to one, place. They're entitled. They come in and they think they can expect to just ask for whatever they want and they're going to get it. Again, I get all of those things. But I do think that if you're going to prioritize anything, again, I'm so obsessed with how do these change conversations around how we're going to behave, how we're going to make decisions. And if it's going to come down to it, given the choice between this and this, it's such a good forcing function is like, which one's going to improve the experience? And for who? For the guest. And I think if you use that as a frame enough times, the concept and again, all of the little details will get refined as such that you will provide something to the guests who, again, I truly believe have the power. And that is going to come back to you in the way of, again, word of mouth marketing, where you're not going to have to spend on ads. You're not going to have to worry about drumming up this hype yourself. And you're going to start to have locals that are going to come back to you and you can form a relationship with. And it just goes all the way through the organization when you do it right. I hope that answers the question.
No, it does.
I mean, what do you think? Do you have an opposing thought?
Well, you make a lot of good points on that, because at the end of the day, it is the guest who are paying to get a certain level of experience, right? But I think it also works both ways, because influencers can tank a restaurant as well.
Sure. And so you're combining guests and influencers together, which is true, right? When you're providing an experience to an influencer, you're doing it from the lens of, well, you're a guest. You're sitting at table 11.
Well, okay, so man, I'm going to use you as an example.
Sure.
You maybe 10 years ago, okay? If you had come into my restaurant, you'd be my VIP, right? And I'm going to give you that extra level of care. I will personally cook your meal. I will make sure that everything else is perfect for you, right? Because knowing you, knowing your history, knowing your background and stuff like that, okay, cool. Now set aside that you're not a chef, okay? You're just a basic influencer with 100,000 followers. Okay, cool. I'm still going to treat you at that level of VIP, because you can make my restaurant better. It might not, you might not be Michelin, but there's 100,000 more followers that are going to view my restaurant.
Right.
But what I wanted to also say is exactly what Marco Pierre White had said. I'm being judged by people who know less about food than I do.
Right.
These influencers, I don't know if they have any formal training. I don't know if they have any, an understanding of why I'm putting pork and apples together. I don't know if they understand why I'm doing that. And that's just basic, right? But just an example. So the fact is that, yeah, and you made another great point beforehand as well, where you had said that they're just illusion. They see something and they're very excited about it because the chef came out and they poured, they did the truffle on their steak, and it just makes the experience a lot greater, right? But then there are influencers and they hype it up, and the next person comes in and they're hoping that Chef Ferran Adria is gonna come out and do the shaving, but it's another chef instead.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's a sous chef or something. So with that being said, like, I mean, that's where I'm coming from with that question. It's just, it's a double-edged sword on that, on my perspective, because again, like, yes, you're right. The guest can make or break a restaurant. I've seen it hundreds of times where they don't show up to a restaurant because they don't like the food, the service is crap, and they just leave it alone and let it die on its own. Or the same thing with Michelin, they'll take a star away, and that's, just unfortunately, like that chef who had lost the star, and he was gone the next day. So at the end of the day, it just goes both ways. I think it's half and half.
I wanted to touch on one thing you said, and for the listener speaking, I know this point of frustration, which is what you mentioned about the person at the table, influencer or not really understanding what it is that you're trying to do. And as frustrating as that can feel, because you've trained in XYZ locations, or in the chef world, in the culinary realm of all of us standing there behind the stoves, and we've been prepping for X number of hours, and we've schlepped all these ingredients up the stairs from the walk-in downstairs, and we've done all this work to do it, and the person just doesn't get it. There's a great anecdote from an entrepreneur named Chase Jarvis, and he talks about this thing called the other 50%. And I'll summarize here just for the listener, because I think that this really helped me as I was almost nervous to go out to tables and talk about food, because I kind of operated from the sense of, well, the food should speak for itself. I hear that a lot from chefs talking about their stuff. And the other 50% from Chase Jarvis says, once you've made the thing, the other 50% is telling people about it. And he talks about it from the sense of, I've taken this photo series in Africa, and I put together this photo book, and I've done all the editing and post-processing, and I've talked with the publisher, and I chose the paper, and we got the glossiness just right on this thing. And he talks about how artists, from a creative perspective, just put that out there, and they think like, okay, here it is. Everybody should know who I am and what I do and why this is special and why you should buy it. And he says, you've only gotten 50% of the way there. And that feeling, that gut punch is like, oh man, I still have 50% to go. I still have to market this thing. I still have to make the website. I still have to go on podcasts and talk about this thing. And for chefs, yes, you still have to go out to the table and talk about why pork and apples make sense for the concept that you're in and your philosophy as a chef and the season that it happens to be. And it might not necessarily be the chef doing it. You might delegate it to a really talented front of house person, or you might train your sous chef, as I was trained, to, hey, you need to go talk about the philosophy of why we're using this type of seafood at this restaurant and the fishmongers that we decide to use. And then the fact that we have a guy hand diving scallops for us, and we open them in the back from alive every single day. We have a cooler that is special temperature controlled to, keep these things alive. And so again, again, it's not a bash on expectations, because it is this funny, like, man, I just wish people would get it. And I understand that place. But I think it is also maybe doing a little bit of a disservice to, this is my optimism brain kicking in. Where's the opportunity in that situation to stand at the table and teach a person about your philosophy or your way of being? Because that person might have had a restaurant experience 2 nights ago that was just like totally lackluster, and they never got this kind of treatment. And that comes back to the experience piece of like you standing there and talking about your philosophy. Again, the captain of the table talking about this thing. That's how that influencer is going to get more educated. And I think that maybe comes back to what we're talking about, where if you just go to hype dinner after hype dinner after hype dinner after hype dinner, you're not really learning anything. You know what I mean? So like maybe, again, I'm a big personal responsibility, sovereign individual type of guy. And so it's like, where's the onus on us maybe? Like maybe the chefs are potentially part of the problem of like, maybe when we get an influencer dinner request, is there a world where we could say, hey, PR person, I'm totally down to do this influencer dinner. But what I want you to do is get all the influencers to come into the kitchen, and I'm going to talk for 15 minutes. I haven't been to that many dinners that do that, right? Like they invite everybody in and they sit at the table and the chef comes out and maybe just basically dictates what's on the menu in front of all of us. Like maybe there's a little bit of education here that again can really bring things full circle and make this a situation that we're not complaining about in another 10 years. Again, I'll get off my soapbox, but that was just something that kind of came to mind.
Do you think that type of experience is solely for fine dining, or can we do that for QSR or even, sit down restaurant?
I love the backstory. I have this whole rant that I will go on, which is food is not a story, which we can certainly jam on if that would be an interesting thing for you to talk about. But I think when people hear me say that, what they get caught up in is like, okay, well, I don't say anything about the food then. I don't give any sort of context. I don't give any sort of history. I don't give my background. I don't give anything. And I fall into that trap of the food should speak for itself. And I've really kind of like been spending some time on how knowledge can influence an experience. And so the most basic example, I'm trying to bring my son to mind here because he is like just at the age where he can kind of like spend time in the kitchen with me, which is like one of the coolest things in the world. And if we go to a farmer's market together and, do stuff, or our neighbors right across the street have like incredible like berries in their backyard. And so we will sometimes go and get berries from them, or even just like having him stand there and like snap the woody ends off the end of the asparagus. He is so much more likely to eat that asparagus when he's spent some hands-on time with it. And he's not old enough where he actually conceptually knows that like asparagus grows and it's green and whatever. He just knows that like, I know more about this thing because I saw it go from dad took this out of the fridge and he put it on the counter and then I got to handle it and then we cooked it and now it's here available for me to eat. That is knowledge that you now have the ability to kind of like weave into your perception of the experience. And I think the same thing can happen if you've ever gone to a winery where you're touring the vines and then now all of a sudden you're sitting in the tasting room, you've gone through, looked at all the barrels, you've seen how they're kind of like aging the wine. And all of a sudden you have this opportunity to taste the wine. You bring that knowledge into that. Do you know what I mean? That can't not influence the experience in one way, shape, or form. I think we have this interesting thing of like, at what point does it also fall victim to some of these other things we've talked about? Hype and, being too easily impressed and marketing language just kind of taking over, and making something to seem like something more than it is. But I think we do get to this place of, yeah, there is a responsibility there to talk about any of those philosophy points and just arm that person with a little bit of the whys behind any of these sorts of things. I just get so fascinated with like cuisines that I have yet to explore, like cultures of the world, areas, geography-wise that I just don't have that much experience with. If you just plot me down at a table and serve me even the most authentic version of that thing provided by somebody super talented and has all of the trappings of, like a really skilled person cooking that cuisine, I might throw up my hands and just be able to say like, yeah, this was seasoned really well. Or like, maybe you get to a place where you're like, I think about like a ceviche, for example. The first time somebody's going to have a ceviche, if you don't prime them at all, they're going to be like, oh, this is this fish dish. Why in the world is the fish texture like that? You know what I mean? If they've never had something like that before, it can maybe be this like really jarring thing. But you go to Peru and you sit down at a little, like marble-topped bar in Lima and you have your first experience of like some of the most incredible ceviche of your life. And it's like, that's where my wife and I went for our honeymoon. And it's like, oh my goodness. You know what I mean? Like that is a totally unique experience. And again, the knowledge of that, I think dictates it more, even if it's your first time having the thing or not. I don't know. I just, I think including that a little bit more could, in a way, make every single party involved a little bit better, because the chef would be more satisfied that like, yeah, these people who are coming to eat and publishing this stuff about me actually get it. The influencers would feel like, oh, I can actually talk about this from a place of authority, even if, like I've only been publishing content for 8 months and I'm a marketing person who just does this on the side. And then I think the PR people would be happier too, because the people who are like getting views on the videos actually kind of like get a sense of what this place is and what they're all about?
I think I've only had that type of experience maybe 3 or 4 times in my life. One being, at the Hobbit in Orange, per se in Vegas. Where else? Oh, no, just kidding. It's only 2.
Yeah.
But
Few
I've
and far
also
between. That discrepancy is, if you're listening, your opportunity, especially if you start to find yourself being consistently misunderstood, or you're
Right.
listening to the way people are talking about you and you're like, they don't quite have it that right. Or you get to this place of like, well, people come in and we're always having to repeat ourselves over and over again, or they sit down and they're just kind of like unsure of what to order. The places who do it amazingly well, you get to this place where people come in and they instinctively know, this is what I want. I want it because so-and-so told the story for me. And you can kind of like scale that. You can get leverage on this information that you're trying to disseminate by just being a little bit more following that philosophy of like, you're only 50% of the way there.
Yeah, a restaurant like Alchemist, um, very different food, but they explain it for a reason. It's not just because they wanna teach you the said ingredients or what they put into it, but also to show you exactly how they did said item to make it the end product. I think that restaurant did such a wonderful job in terms of, like, trying to get the cooks or the chefs to be able to explain to the diner what they're doing and how they did it and why they're doing it, right? And that's definitely on my bucket list to go to that restaurant and try it
Same,
out because at the
same.
end of the day, it's like you want to, as a chef, I want to continue learning, but also it's a great way to continue to grow some content too. Uh, but I mean, that restaurant is continuously looking to perfect their different way of cooking. Um, have you ever lost yourself in the pursuit of perfection, and how did you ever find your way back if you did?
I think I became very disillusioned with that type of food. And I think that type, just to get really crisp on my analogies here, is, or definitions here, is uh, El Bulli before 2010. Alinea from 2005 to, I have this menu on my wall I'm looking at, 2013. I have a meal from 2012. And this was back when they had lamb 86 on the menu. So it was a couple pieces of lamb and then 86 other garnishes that you could kind of enjoy with this piece of lamb. You have Alchemist. I think the counterculture to that was New Nordic food, which was, again, more rooted in things like fermentation and dry aging and curing and more seasonal sensibilities that kind of go along with this. So maybe not so much in that direction, which I think is why Alchemist is such a paradigm breaker for folks, because it is in the heart of New Nordic country in Copenhagen, but it is this kind of like, Spanish sensibilities. Mugaritz is maybe another example of this. And when I say became disillusioned with that food, I think it was the combination of working at Grace as the first job that I had out of culinary school. And this was Curtis Duffy's 3 Michelin-starred restaurant in Chicago. He was coming off of a stint at a hotel, but before that, he was chef de cuisine of Alinea. And so a lot of the recipes we would use at Grace were old Alinea recipes, basically. And I found myself just kind of like thinking about the experience I had before that was at Per Se as an extern. And at Per Se, if there was extra tuiles, or if there was some trim left over from doing some chips, or if there was some like herb, left on the cutting board, I would snack on that mise en place. You know what I mean? And I never found myself snacking on my own mise en place at Grace, regardless of if it was my station or not. And that's maybe telling of, like it wasn't just me being maybe not so good of a chef de partie at Grace. It was genuinely, I was just like not that excited about the food. And Curtis at that time was a big proponent of like 18 elements on a dish, or 9 component do you know what I mean, dishes. There was certain courses that had like 3 squeeze bottles of puree, and we do dots all over the place on this particular dish. And even if you go and you take it like super minimalist, I have this book on my shelf here, which is the Day at El Bulli book. And I never got to go eat at El Bulli specifically, but I did. And again, I have a menu on my wall from Next, when Next and Dave Barron did the El Bulli menu, and they brought back, I think it was like a 23-course menu. And so I got to have interpretations of Ferran's food in that way. But I think you get to this place of having that, and similar to what you're saying, just because it's a bunch of different courses, or just because it's using hydrocolloids, or just because it happens to not look like food when it's presented on a, don't even call it a plate, you know what I mean? Like we call it a floating branch vessel thing, do you know what I mean? That you can ultimately put something on. I don't know if I would classify that as perfection. And there's a great book by Heston Blumenthal that talks about this too, where he has been making the media rounds lately. I don't know if you've seen videos of him recently where he's run ragged, and he talks about his problems with not sleeping and not taking care of his health, and
depression, anxiety.
Depression, anxiety, mental health problems. And he's, all of that under the guise of, look at how hard I pushed for perfection at the Fat Duck. And then you go have a meal at a restaurant like Etxebarri in Spain. Or you go to Chef Zayu Hasegawa's restaurant called Den in Tokyo. And you have this experience of sitting there, and the dishes that you're having, I call these swearing at myself moments at a table. I have very similar experiences at Chef William Bradley's Addison, or John Yao at Cato. I could go on. There's a bunch of different restaurants where I've had these moments. And I swear at myself as I'm eating that bite, because I'm like, I hope I can swear on this show. I just basically say, like, you like, you figured out how to get this texture, or you pair these flavors together that I saw it on the menu and I was like, what is this guy doing? And I have it, and the way that you balanced salt and acid and temperature and all of it coming together, or the way that you, again, have that moment that Thomas Keller talks about in the French Laundry Cookbook, where it's like, I wish I could just have one more bite. Those are these little like shimmerings of perfection. And I think that's maybe where people get caught, is it's not something that you ever get to hold. You never get to hold perfection. It's like any of these other ephemeral things. The wind, sunlight. I'm getting very, colorful with my language here. But I don't think that, like, having had enough of those experiences, you get to this place where even perfection to you on a Thursday night when you go in and you have dinner might be different from me going in on Saturday for lunch. And that chase of, or the expectation that it's only good if I reach this level of perfection, and every single dish is perfect, and every single guest's experience is perfect. Pardon the pun, but I really just think that's a recipe for disappointment, for burnout, for getting upset, for this short-term behavior of, man, we had this guy Ismael come in, and I don't think his experience was perfect. And so now we as a team need to go back to the drawing board, and I need to change every single little thing about the menu so that every single guest's experience is perfect. And so that's why I really like to talk about things more cohesively, or zoom out a little bit. In the macro, how was the experience? And then maybe, again, just a hypothetical for folks listening, like, make the measure of success. Can we show guests at little individual points, man, that was really incredible? And it might not happen on the food level. That's, I think, the point when chefs can sometimes get frustrated. I mean, and even talking about, you go to In-N-Out Burger. Let's take it all the way to the other end of the spectrum. I lived in California for some time. I loved that. I lived in Northern California for a long time. My wife and I, about a year and a half ago, went on a trip to Southern California. We drove from LA down to San Diego. And on the way, because we're doing this road trip, we stopped along the way and got In-N-Out. I think it's so freaking impressive. And again, it is this little glimmer of like perfection to me that I did. You type In-N-Out on your phone on Google Maps, and it says In-N-Out Burger, show locations, meaning there's not just one. So I can click that and it'll show me all of the places on my route. And I think it is so freaking impressive, arguably perfect, that I don't care which one I select because I know I'm going to get exactly what I'm going in there for, which is a double-double and animal style fries. And I think that, again, talking about it can be on the food side, like what I just outlined with In-N-Out. It can be on the service side. It can be on the wine side. It can be on the way that the bathroom looked when you went in there. And it's just like, again, these little shimmerings, these little like fleeting perfection moments. And I don't think like that is a much more, I'll call it like an infinite game to play for me as I'm thinking about like when I get out of this season of family and I'm really kind of like back into things and I'm wanting to go into building more experiences. That again feels like a game I can play for 30 more years as opposed to this fallacy that one day I will have a menu, a location, a team that is going to be able to execute on all this. And just to really round this out, if you've ever done some research on musicians, we don't have the luxury that they have of being able to have a day in the studio where you're there and the equipment's just right and the energy of the team that's around you, all the musicians you're playing with and the producer that's sitting in there and all the little, nuances of your emotions going into singing that line. You can have a perfect day in the studio and you can capture that. And the millions of people who listen to that record will be able to experience that quote unquote perfection that you were able to produce. We don't have that luxury because of all of the trappings and again, like problems that we have to grapple with between seasonality and the person who's working garmager station and the onions that we happen to get in and the allergy that the person on that table happens to have, the person who's describing the dish that we just hired as a food runner. All of these things make the work that we do so much harder to expect perfection from. And so again, that also makes it so that I've almost removed the desire for what I think these books that I read growing up or these chefs that would talk about the way that they would try to put their dishes together. Again, I just became very unenthused with that as an outcome. And I think it's actually been very therapeutic for me to land here because I don't have this almost like, again, I just think it leads to almost this level of suffering with your work because you're always like, well, I'm not quite there yet. Or I don't know. I just fall into like really negative self-talk when that's the expectation. And I'll speak personally there.
Yeah, it's definitely high pressure, high standards. It's not only just within yourself, but you're also trying to do it for example, again, Michelin, or if you're doing it for a specific food critic or even an influencer. In-N-Out is perfect. There's
Yes.
nothing.
Yeah.
I've never had a
No
bad
notes.
experience.
No notes.
I've had different burgers from all over the country, and nothing has been near In-N-Out. So yeah, no, I'm not gonna say anything else about that.
I should add, my favorite burger is from this franchise called Culver's in Wisconsin, which is where I grew up. And not being able to get Culver's when I was living in California. And also the little like nostalgic of you get off work super late or you wake up late on your day off and you look at you roll over and you look at your clock and it's like, man, it's 1 p.m. You know what I mean? I just woke up on my day off and I'm starving. I'm going to go get In-N-Out. I almost like had to develop this love for In-N-Out, but now it holds a place. It's like, it's still on the Mount Rushmore of burgers for me.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to lay that out there as just a fun factoid about myself. I've like even gone into like the net worth you need to have own a Culver's franchise in Wisconsin, because I just think it's so interesting to, again, brand is so strong, consistency is so there. I love their menu. It's just, yeah, we could talk all day about burgers.
And just an FYI, we're not sponsored by
No,
Culver's
not
or
yet.
In-N-Out.
Yes. Hey, talking about taking money from restaurants, I will 100% take Culver's check. Just DM me.
All right, you hear that, Culver's? Pay them. I do have a couple more questions. I know
Please.
you're
Yeah,
limited,
please.
so.
This is fun.
So yesterday I came across a video on Instagram as I was loading up my my thing, and this girl had said, and I followed her and I forgot her Instagram account, but she made a really appealing video, got a lot of engagement out of it, and she essentially had said that when she got into work, she had set up her station. Her mise en place was already ready to go, ready for service. It was, I believe, a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. We all know restaurants are typically slow those days. And she wasn't feeling too good. She asked the chef, "Hey, can I go home?" And the chef said yes. And as she was leaving, she felt a sense of guilt, a sense of am I weak? Am I cut out for this? Because we as chefs, we go in to work as much as we try. We're taught that in this industry we have to be tough. Perfect example. I dislocated my shoulder a couple years ago, before working out, and during that time, my dog jumped on me while I was lifting, and he popped my shoulder out.
Ow.
Put it back in. I told my boss I was going to be there a little late. We were very minimal staff. I had my arm in a sling working saute station. So I'm working a busy Saturday night, one arm, and running the saute station. Mind you, like, it inspired my team for whatever reason that I was able to work saute station on a Saturday night. But at the same time, it wasn't healthy. It wasn't the smartest thing I could have done. Um, we've all experienced bad cuts. We either super glue it back together, put some gauze on it, and we're back on the line. With that being said, is hustle culture in the kitchen toxic, or do you think it's necessary? What's the line between pushing for excellence and burning people out?
It's going to be no surprise that I'm going to share a nuanced answer. I think that anybody who's telling you a black and white answer, I think, is either missing an opportunity to truly get what you're talking about, which is excellence out of either the situation or the individual or the concept, or they are falling a little bit too far in the toxicity, like rub some dirt on it, just continue to go. And that causes what we're seeing, which is like you watch those videos of Chef Heston and you're like, I got really sad. Like I got really bummed watching him in that state saying, I displayed the behavior that Chef Ismael is basically telling me. I pushed through it. And I know you're not saying this directly, but it's what we're talking about. We've both probably had chefs who prioritize or champion this behavior of just grunt through it. And so I'll give a couple of like ways of thinking that might get you to a place of either being more comfortable with some of this or making the decision in that moment of like, yeah, I actually do need to go home today. Or, like maybe it's the opposite. It's like, maybe this is not so bad and I can push through this. The first one is you're going to have harder days than today in your future. I don't know what they're going to look like. I don't know what the circumstances are going to be. I don't know whose fault it's going to be. But I remember specific moments in the event production company that I co-founded, and we had these big events, and they were just, sometimes we would get over our skis in the way that we decided to plan something, or the client would drop something on us last minute, or I would have somebody call out. And I remember one particular day, we were doing this event in a penthouse in Seattle. It was like one of the most beautiful views of the Puget Sound, top floor of a building. And it was very early on in the days of my business partner and I being partners together. And the person who was the host of the dinner sourced all of the wine for the event. And it was a situation of like they had everything picked out. They had decanted stuff. They had pulled out stuff from their cellar. They like drove to a place to source some of the wine and bring it. And I'm getting ready for this dinner. Guests are almost about to arrive. And my business partner says something to the effect of, so I've made sure there's space on the table for all of the individual dishes that you have planned as part of this menu. And I had this pit in my stomach and I was like, I thought we were doing a tasting menu. And she's like, oh no, this is like all hitting the table at the same time. This is family style. And so I'm looking at my menu, which was something like 6 or 7 courses. And I'm like, I'm going to have all of these dishes ready at the same time. And I was like, oh my God. Do you know what I mean? Like that is one of those moments, not really where I could throw my hands up and say, I'm going to go home because I'm the chef of the thing. But it was one of those. Have you ever seen Slumdog Millionaire?
Yeah.
Did we talk about this in the last episode?
No.
Okay. So for those that don't know, Slumdog Millionaire is this movie where this Indian gentleman goes on this game show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Everybody's probably seen it who grew up in our generation. And every single question he ends up getting right. But before, or I think after each of his answers, they do a flashback to his life where the person has an experience, a life experience that teaches him the lesson where it is so obvious to him why the answer is the answer that it is. And it's almost like, I'm getting goosebumps as I was talking about this story. It's almost like the questions of that show were laid out in a way that it was only unique to him and only he could answer it because it was so in line with his life experience. And I think in a lot of ways, any of those moments like that video, I haven't seen the video that you're talking about, but like any of those moments build and build and build you as a professional so that when you have that moment, again, that hard day that's going to come in your career probably hasn't even happened yet. The hardest day of your career probably hasn't even happened yet. So you can look at any one of these moments and say, man, this could be one of these times that's like prepping me to see like, where are my limits? Again, I'm bringing it back to a parenting thing because this is so like palpable with my son right now, where he's testing to see where the limits are. He'll come up, like we have a deck in our house, and he'll take one of his toys, and he knows that he can't get outside of the gate of the thing, but he can throw the toy off the deck into the backyard, and I have to, put my shoes on and go get it. He's testing the limits of where things are. And I think you do the same thing as yourself as a professional. You get to this place of, man, I'm really sick. Or to your point, I can only cook with one arm right now. I have an example story that I tell with folks where I was lifting a big green egg down a set of stairs and had somebody on the other side, but I didn't know how to biomechanically lift. And so I lifted with my back, not with my legs. And I totally threw my lower back out. I basically I couldn't turn. My spine was basically fixed. I basically only had a certain number of degrees of being able to do hip flexion. I couldn't bend down to get into my low boy. And I still had to basically, like, any sort of, like, movement that was too sharp, it basically, like, knocked the wind out of me. Any of those moments, like, show you where your limits are. And I think that can be really, really valuable for the person because you're going to get to that day where I had to cook all 6 dishes at the same frickin' time and get them on the table that I expected I was going to get time to, like, perfectly temperature control this fish that I was preparing. And this thing was going to be cold and, like, oh my goodness, how am I going to plate stuff now? All of those little moments of like, hey, we got to do a private dining, like the private dining room has to change the way that they're presenting things. And that happened 6 years prior, but I was able to pull that experience out in that moment and make that thing happen. And again, live to see another day type of situation. So is it a situation that is, again, testing where your limits are, and that is a little just notch in your belt that you can, again, use in the future when the time really does call for you to, step up to the plate here. Another one that's kind of helpful, and I had to hear this after my time in kitchens, but I do think it's a really quick anecdote, which is like, if it's not gonna kill you, kind of by definition, you are able to survive it. And if it's going to kill you, like, who cares? Because you're going to be dead. That's like a very like funny way to kind of like approach the situation. But it's like, you can kind of like make it through the other side. And then I think that's okay. That's a justification of rub some dirt on it. You're going to be okay. And also, for really being honest, aren't those fun stories to tell? Like 2 years later, you're like, you and I both, like, I have a scar on my middle finger from like, at a flight coming home from Copenhagen in the morning. I was not supposed to be traveling on the day that I came back to work, but I wanted to spend a little bit of extra time in Copenhagen. And so I took the early flight from like 5 a.m. back to Norway, get in for work. And I'm so tired. And I like cut the tip of my finger off basically. And I still work service. I went to the hospital, had somebody else help me a little bit with prep. And I came back and I ended up working service with this giant freaking thing on my finger. And those are funny moments of just being able to be like, yeah, like that was kind of hardcore. You know what I mean? Like you get to the end of your career and you don't have any of those stories to tell. I think that's kind of boring. You know what I mean? Like that's a very lackluster life to have lived. And so there's a little bit of that. Okay, let's flip to the other side where we're talking about like times when it is okay to throw up the white towel and say, okay, it's time to take a second. I've had moments in my career where I was almost grasping for an excuse to take time away from work. So you wake up with a little fever, you have like even the tiniest little cough, your nose is running, XYZ thing happens. And part of this is like your body's already run down from the work. You're not getting a lot of sleep. Your nutrition is maybe not all that dialed in. You're not getting that much time just to do self-care in general. And you find yourself again, like looking for the tiniest excuse to just reach out your hand and say, can I please have a break? If that's the situation, then it turns into something where you need to almost ask the deeper question around what's going on here. And if you have a really good manager at work, they will do this for you or with you, maybe is what is maybe the better way to say, because that's how it feels in that moment when the manager notices that you're having a really hard time or you've called out 2 days in a row and they maybe know that you're not that sick. That manager is really going to kind of like help coach you through one of these situations. But being mindful of that, I think, again, in hindsight, because I didn't do this in the moment and I sometimes wish that I did, is really being honest with myself and saying, why do I need this break? What is causing some of these levels of depleted energy? Talking about use the word burnout in a genuine, like, this is what I'm feeling type of way. Because then you can really address the problem for what it is and have the cycle of, I'm feeling these things, I'm taking action to resolve it, I'm back on my feet, and now I'm back to 100%. That cycle can be much shorter than what will play out if you continue to lie to yourself. So if you say things like, man, I just need to rub some dirt on it. I have friends who've been sick for 3 weeks, right? You're sick for 3 weeks because you couldn't take 1 or 2 days off. And now all of a sudden your performance suffers across 15 days of work. Like that's crazy that we do it to ourselves, but I've been there. I'm sure you've been there too. Listeners probably been there. Number 3. But I sometimes feel like, what's a quote from Gabor Mate around addiction? He has this thing where he says, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. And that's a really interesting reframe for people to think about, again, these vices that they might have in their life. I think you can do the same thing as you think about why do I want to not be at work so badly? And if you can ask that deeper question, sometimes that can lead you to, yeah, I guess I have been working here for 3 years. And I'm just like, I'm really not excited to show up for work anymore. Or maybe there's a situation of like, yeah, maybe I haven't really been taking care of my diet that much. And I'm like kind of overweight. And maybe I should, like I have a great friend. His name's Ray. He lost something like 45 pounds or something like that because he was able to kind of like just take a look at his work situation. And he was like, I can't keep up in the kitchen and I'm always tired because XYZ thing. It's actually nothing related to my station. It is my own personal physical health that's causing me all these, sorts of problems. And then you can actually, again, be honest with yourself and start to take action to resolve some of these things, instead of what you and I are talking about, of this woman feeling guilty, feeling some sense of shame, feeling this sense of like, I'm being judged by my peers because I'm taking a day off to do all these sorts of things. And I think COVID really helped with this, right? Where everybody all of a sudden adopted this stance of, hey, if you're sick, please do not come into work today, because you're going to get other staff members sick, you're going to get guests sick, and it's going to turn into this situation where we might have to close down because we have symptomatic front of house people going out and talking to guests while they're coughing. That is like absolute no-no. And I think that really turned it on its head for a lot of people. And then I think that those are two ends of the argument. And then I think the third thing is like almost like this meta thing of the one I just outlined is this deeper reason for why you have this craving for maybe calling out or taking time away or having some sick time being used. And then the other one is like, where's the judgment coming from on the other side of you deciding that you're going to take some time for yourself, or you're going to call out today, or any of these sorts of things? And really being crisp and clear there about, maybe you need to be honest about, do I want to value this person's opinion? I've had sous chefs in the past who were that rub some dirt on it type of character. And it wasn't that I was not wanting to take the time for myself. I was scared of coming back into work the day after that, and that sous chef ultimately like making my life a living hell for the next 3 days, or saying, hey, do you need to go home today? Like the ragging that people do. And I think that's easier to say when I've been a little bit more experienced and been around the block a few times in the industry, where like I don't value people's opinion that much anymore. But I do think, again, just calling out for what it is, and maybe having a conversation with one of your coworkers and being like, hey, I'm really kind of nervous about like how Chef Sarah is going to react if I call out tomorrow, can again just shine some light on it, so you're treating it for what it is instead of lying to yourself. And I really think about this from the sense of the long-term game here, because how many friends do you and I have who get to this place of being super burnt out in the industry, and they ultimately just like, they leave. They're not participating in any way, shape, or form. They change industries, which again, I don't have any rag on. But they're ultimately miserable because they're like, man, I wish I could have stayed in kitchens, but it was insert a reason. And if you really trace it back, you get to any of these pivotal inflection point moments where, had they just reframed the situation, had they had a conversation with somebody, had they given the situation the honesty that it deserves, they would still be able to participate. They would still be involved. They would still be a member of this community. But because you just kind of like get beaten down so many times through this delusion, like it really is like, if you hear any of us talk about any of these moments, it is really delusional the way that we talk about some of this stuff. I just don't think it should be like encouraged or applauded. And just again, like, I don't think I've talked about this in any way, shape, or form in a long form context. And so like, thank you for even posing the question, because I think it is like this weird taboo thing that we've landed on for whatever reason.
The fact that anybody is asking, how do you think Chef Ismael's gonna feel this way? Or how do you think Chef Ismael's gonna feel if I call out? That to me already poses a lack of communication and a lack of. It's just like my son and I, right? We have a good open line of communication. He can tell me anything, and there won't be any repercussions. And if it's something I don't like, then we'll talk it over and see how we're going to figure this out. And not a lot of chefs do that now. Or actually, not. I'm not saying now. Before the pandemic, and you and I both know this, where I'm sure you've asked this question as well too, right? I've asked the question as well, like, oh man, how would Chef Marco feel like if I called out tomorrow, right? And part of that too is because we call out, we're letting our team down. They're relying on us to work on the garnish station. They're relying on us to work on fish station, saute station, grill station, whatever station, right? They're relying on us to be there, and they're hoping that we're going to be performing. But on another note too, like if you are sick and you are, you're sick for 3 weeks and it's hindering your performance, especially if you're working in a Michelin star kitchen where they'll bench you essentially for not performing to that standard, then you're just shooting yourself on the foot at that point, right? Rather than just taking a day or two off and try to sleep it off and then just go right back into it, then you're good. And it sucks because there's a lot of kitchens who have very small, tight-knit teams, and they can't afford for a call-out. So what do you do then?
I mean,
And
it's a great feeling that you just discussed. You might have fought for 16 months to get roast station.
Yeah.
And now that you have it, similar to what you're talking about, I'm going to be seen as a not so dependable roast station person. I have this responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. And to your point on small kitchen teams, there might not actually be anybody who's trained up enough to work roast station if I am not there. And so I totally hear that dilemma on both sides. The person working the roast station, I don't want I don't want any glimmer that anybody else can work roast station, because if they do, now all of a sudden I'm not the only one who can work roast station. Now I might not have a job coming into next week because now chef sees that, hey, Brandon can work roast station just as reasonably well, 80% of the level that I can. And now you want to, and that's ego talking, for really being honest. And then on the small team chef side, it's like, I always get so frustrated when people talk about like restaurants and chefs saving money by like cutting costs. And it's like, dude, we are running as lean as possible. There is not a world where I don't have 6 people standing in the kitchen doing nothing on a, like random night of the week. Everybody is like as dialed in as we can possibly be. To a fault sometimes, right? But to what you're talking about with communication, I don't know, a simple solve for this might be, when somebody gets hired here, we let them know that XYZ circumstances happen. I want you to call out and I want you to take sick time. And when that happens, this is going to be the order of operations from a process perspective that's going to happen. I'm going to step in and I'm going to expedite. The sous chef who's normally doing that is going to step off and work your station, and everything is going to be okay. Like that, from a peace of mind perspective, would have provided me so much kind of like clarity, and I would have been so much more likely to do that. And the reality is, most of the chefs, like who are running these organizations, the leadership team, they know that's going to be the case. But the chef de partie team might have no clue that that's what's going to happen if they end up calling out. And because they're bringing in this PTSD of the other restaurant that they worked at that didn't have this good infrastructure in place, that causes some of these problems to ultimately happen. And I would be remiss if I didn't call out the fact that some of this stuff gets used and abused, right? You've probably also worked with people who they have the littlest thing come up and they say, I'm not going to lose my job. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to take a day off. I'm going to call out. Maybe, I spent the first, couple of hours a day in bed, and then I woke up and it's fine. And you see that person, drinking at a bar later that night. That is using and abusing the privilege of, working at an organization that allows you to take sick time. And that's why I come back to the reason of, did you really need time to recover from being sick, or were you just kind of a little bit under rested, right? So what you really wanted is a little bit of flexibility to go off on a Thursday night and drink at your favorite wine bar. Again, just being honest with what the situation is. And then you might not know. So again, very concrete example, just to give a paint a picture for people. We used to keep a roster of event staff who, at a moment's notice, if somebody called out for an event, we could call, and they were technically competent. We had a relationship with them. We had backup people for the event in the event of I was driving to the event and I got a flat tire. I woke up this morning and I had a really bad cough. Or back in the days when, like the height of my event production company was during like right around COVID. And it was like, hey, I tested positive for COVID yesterday. What are you going to do as the business owner? That responsibility fell on me. And so I had the steps that I needed to do to kind of like do those things. And all of our staff knew that was the case. In the event organization logistics spreadsheets we would make, everybody could see who the bench roster was for if you need to call out, this is who's going to get called in to fill your spot. And maybe a little bit of that, like transparency might help. Obviously, it might also increase the rate by which you see these use and abuse problems. But again, we compare it to the alternative, which is what we're talking about in a really, really negative and toxic sense. I think net, it helps with retention. It helps with people showing up at work and being actually high performers, the things that we care about, striving for excellence. And so, yeah, I get just as frustrated as the next person in seeing this go wrong.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I firmly believe that we should have a good open line of communication in order for the team to be prepared, right? If we know you're going to call out tomorrow, then maybe you should prep for your station, for the person who's going to work your station, and then we'll make sure that that person working your station will get you ready for the next day. And you're also right. I've had experiences where some of my cooks would take advantage of that, and you kind of have to. You can't cut their hours because here in California it's retaliation, right? And that's a whole nother mess that you don't want to get into. So what do you do now, right? How do we set the standard for everyone else that action is not okay? And that depends on how each individual chef or restaurant owner is going to handle that. But Chef Justin, thank you so much, man. I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to be here with me and speak to me again. And it's always an honor to have you on. And if those who haven't seen part 1, you'll know why he's such an honor to me, because he's the one who essentially shaped my my career as a chef moving forward through his early videos. So it's always a pleasure to have you on. Are there any final words or any final thoughts that you have?
No, the pleasure's mine. It's really exciting to see what you're building. And again, I'm humbled to be on, and you always just ask such great questions and lead the conversation in a way that I get excited to just delve into ideas that I think make the industry better is the wrong word. I just think I want to provide value to the people who decide that this is going to be their profession. And I know that it's hard. And so I hope to be a voice for the maybe untapped or untouched, or maybe there's a little bit of like taboo is the wrong word. But I think conversations like these ultimately make people feel like they want to continue to play, because the work that we do, although it's not, going to Mars or saving lives, I think when you I don't know, my father's in his last legs of his life, and I'm getting a little vulnerable here, but I think that he talks about experiences that he's had at restaurants very fondly, and obviously the family stuff that he prioritizes, I think that those are kind of like some of the things that he holds most dear, and we do that on a daily basis for people. And the more we have the opportunity to do that, the less toxicity that we have kind of like percolating in some of this work. And the longer runway we have to continue for this to be a thing, the happier I will be. And so I just want to say thank you to you and your listeners for the work that they're doing, because it often does go all unacknowledged. So thank you.
Absolutely. I know I've asked you this question before in the previous podcast, but for those. How do we find you, and
Yeah.
what's your information there? How can we get a contact of you?
Yeah, so if you search my name on almost every platform, you'll find it, whether that's Instagram or YouTube. I run a company called Repertoire, which is kind of a hospitality media company. We do tools and educational insights around, again, being a high performer, striving for excellence in the industry. And so that's joinrepertoire.com. And I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. And so if anybody wants to either continue the conversation or jam on any of the ideas that we discussed today, I'm pretty, again, both open to that. And it is truly one of the things that like gets me excited about the fact that I get to have so many kind of like one-on-one conversations and off mic things, because the ideas is kind of like where I get the most jazzed up these days. And so exploring those both on air and off is just incredibly fulfilling for me.
Awesome. Chef Justin, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And feel free to reach out anytime. And hopefully there's a part 3 again.
Absolutely. Count me in. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks.